Today, on the Locked On Blues podcast, I'm going to be giving my predictions for the defensive pairings of the St. Louis Blues this upcoming season. Last episode, I did the forward line, so if you missed that one, go check out that episode. Had a lot of fun doing it, talking about each player individually. Obviously, this episode might be a little bit shorter since there's half as many players to talk about, at least in terms of, um, you know, the starting six. I'll obviously get into some of the guys that aren't going to be starting and stuff, but should be fun. I'm looking forward to it. At the end, I'll go over the goaltending situation, something I've talked about a lot, though. So, not a lot new to be said there. Should be a good episode, though. Make sure you stay tuned.
You're Locked On Blues, your daily podcast on the St. Louis Blues. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Locked On Blues podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and your number one source for daily Blues content. I'm your host, Josh Hyman. As always, if you haven't met me yet, thanks for joining. I've been doing this show for a while now, tons and tons of episodes in the backlog. So if you like this one, you can follow me on Twitter, Josh Hyman NHL, and listen to any of the previous episodes because there's a lot of backlog, a lot of Blues coverage that you haven't seen. But anyways, without further ado, let's hop into this episode after I thank you guys for making Locked On Blues your first listen because we are free and available on all podcast platforms. All right, so on Monday's episode, I talked about my predictions for the forward lines. In this episode, I'm going to be doing my predictions for the defensive pairings. Now, defensive pairings aren't as exciting as the forward lines because I don't think there's quite as much variety there. I think it's pretty much set in stone. There is definitely some room for interpretation, like with guys like Scott Perunovich and Marco Scandella and all that stuff. So there's definitely some debate. And because of that, I'm going to be kind of giving two different groups of defensive pairings, and one of them is going to hinge on whether or not Scott Perunovich is in the starting six, or maybe even if the Blues run seven defensemen. Anyway, so let's just get started with the first defensive pairing. Probably the two best defensemen on the St. Louis Blues, and that is I'm going to have Torey Krug on the left with Justin Falk on the right. Talking about Torey Krug first, well, I mean, he's a great player. He's obviously undersized. He's not the most gifted defensively. There's definitely a little bit of a liability there. He's not, big enough to take on a lot of forwards. So if you got a one-on-one with Torey Krug, him backing up into the defensive zone, he's going to have a bit of a tougher time than some of the other defensemen. And winning puck battles, that sort of thing. He is very tenacious. He puts in a ton of effort and he uses his size almost to an advantage at times, getting leverage on guys. So he's not a complete, negative in terms of like puck battles and stuff, but there is definitely just an element of his size is going to inhibit him no matter how skilled he is, no matter how much he, is able to make up for it in other areas. Him being undersized is a negative in that aspect, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't bring, positives to the team. It's rare to have a 5'9" defenseman on your first pairing. And the reason is that he is, I still think he's a net positive defensively. I think he's not close to like an elite defensive defenseman, but I don't think he's bad defensively. I just think he does the most with what he's got in his limited size and reach and all that stuff. But where he makes up for it is offensively. The offensive game of Torey Krug is spectacular to watch, whether it's 5v5 or the power play, specifically the power play. Has been great, for him this year. He's been the quarterback for the Blues, and in his absence, we've definitely felt a lack of offensive production from the defensive end. The Blues in the pad on, good scoring numbers from their defensemen, and Torey Krug is the catalyst for that on this team. He is really, really good at moving the puck, a great passer, great at putting shots on net for deflections and for rebounds and that sort of thing. And he can also lead the rush as well. If he picks up the puck in the defensive zone, he can skate it out all by himself, which is a rarity for defensemen in the NHL. It's hard to find a guy that is fast enough and skilled enough with the puck to sort of lead the rush himself from the defensive zone. So Torey Krug on the first pairing allows for, almost like four forwards to be out there at times. With his offensive ability. And like I said, he can hold his own enough defensively to where I'm not too concerned about that. And I welcome him on the first pairing. Now, Justin Falk, on the other hand, is that elite defensive defenseman, and he is still a bit of a two-way defenseman. He can put up the points. He can, he's got a nice shot. He's a good passer. He's good at holding the blue line in the offensive zone. But where he really excels is defensively. Um, he is a force in that end. He plays really, really well in his own zone. He makes life really difficult for opponents, getting his stick in passing lanes, and winning puck battles and being the first guy to the puck, and pinning guys up against the board and taking the puck away that way. Where he really excels, though, and it doesn't really happen all that often, fortunately. Well, I guess with the Blues it does, but breaking up 2-on-1s or 3-on-2s or just odd man rushes. There isn't a single guy on the St. Louis Blues that I would rather see staring down a 2-on-1 or a 3-on-2 than Justin Falk. He is tremendous at getting his stick in the passing lane in those situations and breaking those plays up and then quickly turning it into offense with his good passing ability and his good breakout ability. So yeah, I mean, Justin Falk was one of the Blues' best players last season. Just from the defensive end, he was kind of the positive aspect in what was a negative experience with the defense. And for that reason, I think the first two pairings, first of all, I think are going to be flip-flopped. I don't think they're going to be super consistent, like in terms of who plays with who. You could argue that Colton Parayko could be a first pairing guy. Justin Falk, Torrey Krug, and Colton Parayko are all going to play around 20-ish minutes a night. It just depends on everyone else and the other defensemen, what they can do. So that first pairing is honestly one that I'm very confident in. They don't have a true number one defenseman in like the sense of Alex Pietrangelo, Victor Hedman, Cale Makar, but those guys don't grow on trees. There aren't a lot of teams with a true number one defenseman, and the Blues have a pretty solid first pairing, even without having that number one defenseman. So that being said, I'm going to head into the first ad break, thank our sponsors, and then I'll get into the second and third defensive pairings in the second and third segment. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our good friends over at Built Bar and one of their newer products, Built Puffs. They're legitimately delicious. It's a chocolate bar filled with marshmallow. It's very soft and chewy. It tastes like a dessert. It tastes like something you'd get from like the grocery store at the pastry section. But they're healthy. They're good for you. And plus, they have a new flavor, and there's the cookie dough chunk puffs. I haven't personally tried them yet, but I cannot wait until I do because Built Puffs are already one of my favorite, and cookie dough is top 3 flavor of ice cream. I don't know. We could debate that another time, but I'm really excited to try them. You guys should be too. And plus, they're good for you. They're only 160 calories and have a whopping 15 grams of protein in them. So they're good for you. You can feel good after you eat them, and they taste delicious. So go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your entire order. That's promo code LOCKED15 at built.com. I'll be right back with the second half of today's episode. Okay, so second pairing. Here's where things get a little funky because I think the second pairing really only has one guarantee, and that is Colton Parayko on the right side. Let's talk about Colton Parayko. So there was a time, specifically during the Blues Cup run in 2019, when Colton Parayko looked like he could be a number one defenseman in this league. He was playing alongside Jay Bouwmeester, and when he was out on the ice, the Boston Bruins, or pretty much any other team, San Jose Sharks series, he was also really good. When he was out on the ice, other teams could not score. They could not get any offense going. There was talks of Colton Parayko winning the Conn Smythe at points as the Blues' best player. He was incredibly valuable to them during that cup run, and the expectation after that was that he was only going to get better, and eventually, I guess, step into Alex Pietrangelo's shoes upon Pietrangelo's departure, and that didn't quite happen. He had some injury trouble. He had some back issues that really caused him to struggle with his mobility and his skating, and just being able to be big and strong, what he really relies on. But that being said, he's still a very, very, very good defenseman. He's still out there playing 20 plus minutes a night. I don't think he's a liability. He doesn't turn the puck over that much. Like, yeah, there are times when you really feel like Parayko could be using his strength a little bit more. He gets beaten to a puck, or he loses a puck battle against a guy much smaller than him with a much shorter reach than him. And that can be very frustrating. It really feels like he could be a dominant presence on the ice, just with his size and his speed. He is a really good skater as well, which I will get into a little bit after I talk about his defense. But defensively, it definitely does feel like he could be doing more, but that's not to say that he isn't a very good defenseman with what he gives you right now. Parayko is out there 20 plus minutes a night against first or second lines, and he still makes it very difficult to score and very difficult to get offense going just because of the fact that he's 6'6" and has a hockey stick that can span, half of the defensive zone. So he's still a very reliable defenseman in that sense. Just the one area that he lacks is a consider. When he was with Jay Bomeister, he looked so good because Jay Bomeister is really reliable. When Marco Scandella first came to the St. Louis Blues, and they had that really good chemistry, he looked really good again. And I would honestly say that when he played with Nick Leddy last year, he kind of got that defensive ability tuned up a notch as well. Because the problem is when he's playing with guys like Marco Scandella now, who is really just a liability all around. As much as I hate to say it, Parayko is kind of forced to do it all. He's forced to be offensive and defensive, and that kind of just takes him out of position a little bit more. He's not getting back as quickly, and it makes him it exposes his weaknesses even more. So when he has a nice, reliable defenseman that can either be the stay-at-home guy or the puck-moving guy, he could do the other thing and do it really well. And for that reason, that's why I'm kind of so up in the air about who his playing partner is going to be this year. Night one, I have it penciled in as Nick Leddy. I think him and Nick Leddy looked really good when they played together at times. I think Nick Leddy does all of those things that I was talking about in terms of being a really good puck mover and sort of being a more offensive defenseman, and can let Colton Parayko stay at home. The only thing is I think Nick Leddy is too much of a liability defensively to where Colton Parayko is going to be asked to do a little bit too much in that end. But when he uses his speed and his skating ability, I think Colton Parayko is one of the best skaters on the team and one of the best skaters at his size in the entire league. He can be incredibly sneaky offensively. He can create rushes really, really well. There's that one goal a few years ago where he did it all himself and he one-handed backhanded it into the top corner of the net. That was great. He's really capable of using his size and his skating ability to just get down the ice like that. It's very impressive. But, if he's playing with a guy like Nick Leddy, he's not going to be doing that as much. And that's okay. It's not a bad thing that he won't be as asked to do so much offensively. But the thing is, like I said, Nick Leddy, I think would lead to Parayko doing a little bit too much defensively. And you say, okay, then swap him for Scandella, who's better defensively than Nick Leddy. But in terms of puck moving and offense, he's really got nothing going there, which would change Parayko's role. And I think that's what's tough for Parayko is he's going to be spending half the season playing with a guy like Nick Leddy, where he'll be able to do all the defensive stuff and the other guy will be able to do all the offensive stuff, versus when he plays with Scandella, he almost has to change his play style a little bit to account for that. A sneaky pick, which I don't know if we'll see happen at any point. I don't even know what this guy will end up in the lineup at all, or how much he'll play, but that is Scott Perunovich. I think if Scott Perunovich gets to a point where he's more comfortable playing 5-on-5, he could be a perfect pairing alongside Colton Parayko. I think he's a little bit better defensively than Nick Leddy at times, even though he's small like Torrey Krug. He's very tenacious in the defensive end. He's undersized, same thing as Torrey Krug, and I think it would be a little bit difficult to justify having 2 5'9" defensemen in your top 4. But even then, I think in terms of just complimenting Colton Parayko and what he brings to the game, I think Scott Perunovich would be a pretty good choice there. But opening night, I'm going to predict it to be Nick Leddy. Or Marco Scandella, depending on what the Blues want to do. But in a perfect world, I think Marco Scandella is the 7th defenseman. And I'm going to get into the third defensive pairing, I guess, right now. And then in the third segment, I'll get into the goaltending situation, even though there isn't a whole lot to be said there that hasn't been said already. So third pairing defensively, I think the right side is going to be Robert Bortuzzo. He definitely looked like he was heading towards a decline at points, but towards the tail end of last season, he really put it together and started playing pretty good hockey. I think he's very, very underrated for what he does. He doesn't play a ton of minutes, but when he does, he's an absolute defensive presence, out there for the St. Louis Blues. He does all the dirty things right. He gets into the dirty areas. Not the dirty things. People want to call him a dirty player, but you know what I mean. He does all the things that nobody else wants to do. He's tremendous at winning puck battles. He's a very physical player. He can hit hard. He He can break up 2-on-1s, all that stuff. He just can't necessarily do it as well against the top end talent. So when he's out there against like third and fourth lines, he looks great. But if he's out there against like first or second lines, he'll definitely get exposed because he's definitely lost a step in the speed department. But he's very reliable. You know what you're getting out of Robert Bortuzzo every single time he's on the ice. You don't really have to worry about him making a boneheaded turnover all that often, or he does take a fair share of penalties, but for the most part, he can stay pretty disciplined, which I like. So yeah, Robert Bortuzzo, I think, is a staple on that third pairing. Now, the third pairing left side is interesting because you got Marco Scandella, Nico Mikkola, and Scott Perunovich, all as guys that I think could play for that spot. And I think Robert Bortuzzo isn't in the lineup every night because of that, just because I think of those three, there's definitely not reason to sit one of them for the entire season. I think Nico Mikkola has shown strides of being really, really good. He definitely was overwhelmed in his top pairing minutes. I honestly think the Blues might go to 7 defensemen more often than not, because I think you have to play Mikkola pretty consistently, and I also think you have to play Perunovich pretty consistently. And for what it's worth, they're also going to be wanting playing Scandella at least a few times here or there, but I don't think you can really change much in that top 4, especially with the contract you just gave Nick Leddy. I don't think you could take Nick Leddy out of the lineup, obviously. Maybe you can justify bumping Nick Leddy down to the third pairing and playing Nico Mikkola and Colton Parayko together like you were last season at times, but for that last defenseman spot, if you're only playing 6 defensemen, you have Mikkola, Scandella, and Perunovich all fighting for minutes, which is why I think they're going to go 7 defensemen, depending on the matchup, depending on the opponent, just because Perunovich is a guy that you maybe you don't want to play him as much at 5v5. Maybe he's that 7th defenseman in that lineup. But on the power play, having Perunovich and Krug as power play quarterbacks for the 2 units is deadly. Perunovich is just as good as Torrey Krug sometimes as that power play quarterback. And he's also your youngest defenseman by far. So you kind of want him to progress. You want him to grow. You want him to hopefully get to a point where he can be a second pairing defenseman and be very capable at 5v5. That being said, Nico Mikkola is also pretty young and shows a lot of promise defensively, whereas Perunovich shows that promise offensively. So I think Mikkola needs to get minutes as well. As does Marco Scandella. As much as I'm not a fan of Marco Scandella, he is a veteran. He can play well at times, especially if he's on that third pairing, sheltered, whatever. So I think it's really going to be matchup based. If the Blues want to have a more offensive focus in their defense, I think Scott Perunovich is that third pairing defenseman. But I truly think that 7 defensemen is going to be something that we're going to see a lot, barring injury. The good thing is the defense has enough depth where if guys do get hurt, or guys do have to sit out, or whatever, Mikkola, Scandella, Perunovich, those guys can all kind of step up and play anywhere throughout the lineup. Mikkola had first pairing minutes at times. Scandella had first pairing minutes at times. I don't think Perunovich has ever had first pairing minutes, and I don't know if they want him in that position next season, but maybe they will. I don't know, but I mean, the defense is interesting. I think it's going to be more successful than it was last season because these guys have had more time to gel and all that stuff. So it's going to be interesting. In this upcoming third and final segment, I'm just going to spend a minute or two talking about the goalies. I've talked about the goalies so much. I don't want to repeat myself. So I'll be getting into that and then I'll be wrapping up. So thank you all for listening so far and make sure you stay tuned. All right, third and final segment. Let's talk about the goaltenders. I'll start with the backup goalie, or I guess I'll start with the starter because the backup goalie is kind of hinges on the starter. So, starting goalie, big surprise, Jordan Binnington. Man, what can I say about Jordan Binnington that I haven't said a million times throughout this offseason and throughout last season? He is the biggest X factor for the Blues this season. If Jordan Binnington plays well, is a consistent, solid goaltender, then the St. Louis Blues will make the playoffs. If he is able to start 55, 60 games, I don't know, probably not 60 games, but maybe, I don't know. If he's able to start 50 plus games and win a good chunk of them and play well, the Blues will make the playoffs, but he needs to be good. And I think one thing that's important for him is consistent defense in front of him. And the Blues defense was playing so well in that cup run, which is probably why Jordan Binnington, or not only why, but big part of the reason why he had so much success. However, we definitely saw a flash in last year's this past season's playoffs where he looked like he had returned to form. And I don't think the defense was playing all that well in that series against Colorado when he really turned it on and started playing well. So because of that, I have faith that he can turn it around and he can have a solid season because, as I'll now transition into the backup, they need him to play that well because Thomas Greiss is not a guy that is capable of a starting job in the NHL. He is very, very old, and he was very poor last season. Yes, it was with a bad Detroit Red Wings team, so I give him a pass there. I don't think he's going to have a sub 900 save percentage again like he did last season. In the season prior to that, seasons prior to that, he's been up around like 913, 912, which is very, very good. Especially as a backup. There's the question is, was last season a sign of major regression from Thomas Greiss, or was it just that he was playing on one of the worst teams in the NHL? It's tough to say. But they cannot rely on him more than being a backup. He's going to go out there. He'll let up a couple goals a night. He'll probably let up 3 goals a night. But if the offense can be as good as they were last year, I think that he'll be all right. The Blues also always tend to be a little bit more aggressive when they have their backup goaltender in. That's been a problem dating all the way back to the Brian Elliott, Jake Allen days of just playing different styles in front of their 2 goalies. So if they are, play well in front of Thomas Greiss, like they played well in front of Ville Husso, like they played well in front of Jake Allen, or whoever was the backup at the time, I think they're going to be all right. I think the goaltending situation is fine, especially with Joe Hofer in the wings. But it's going to be interesting. That being said, that is all the time I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. I enjoyed making it. Make sure you hit that follow or subscribe button on whatever podcast platform you're listening to me on, or subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can see my beautiful face every single day, my beautiful wall, all that fun stuff. You're missing out. If you're just hearing my voice, you're only getting half the experience. So Locked On Blues on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button there. Hit the notification bell. That way, whenever a new video goes live, you'll get notified right away. Follow Locked On Blues on all of the social accounts, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. You can follow me on Twitter at Josh Hyman NHL. Thank you all so much for listening. And as always, let's go Blues.